They told us that Black history began with slavery, that Africa was a land of primitive tribes with no great civilizations. Well, they lied. The deep roots of history tell us something far different, that our Black ancestors ruled the great Egyptian kingdoms and established order and art in a world of chaos. But hey, maybe you know about these great Black pharaohs. They've been covered on YouTube plenty before. But you probably didn't know that we have them to thank for almost all big religions today. Without these Black kings, you wouldn't know who Jesus was, let alone be going to church every Sunday to pray. Today on Black Stories Untold, we're not only going to uncover how these Black kings saved Egypt from the brink of destruction, but also how they would set in motion events that would change our world forever. When most people think of ancient Egypt, they picture the Great Sphinx, magnificent pyramids, and golden treasures. But by 800 BC, this once mighty empire was crumbling. Corruption ran deep. Their great temples were falling into ruin. The economy collapsed. The spiritual traditions that had made Egypt great for thousands of years were being slowly forgotten. That was until Black kings from the south arrived. So who were these saviors of Egypt? They came from the mighty kingdom of Nubia, a vast and powerful African civilization that stretched along the Nile River south of Egypt. The Nubians possessed remarkable skills that made their civilization flourish. They were expert archers, skilled cattle herders, and master gold miners. Their society was just as sophisticated and complex as the ancient Egyptians, with craftsmen, priests, warriors, and rulers creating a distinctive caste system that made the foundation of ancient Nubian society. What's more, from their strategic position controlling the Middle Nile, the Nubians were able to dominate vital trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa to Egypt and the Mediterranean, becoming fabulously wealthy by trading gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic hardwoods with lands far to the north. But here's where historians twisted the truth for centuries. European archaeologists couldn't accept that Africans built such an impressive civilization. They looked at the magnificent temples and pyramids of Nubia, structures that often rivaled or surpassed Egyptian engineering, and claimed they must have been built by Egyptians or other Caucasians. How convenient for their racist narrative. But the archaeology doesn't lie. The evidence paints a different story, one of powerful rulers who led an advanced civilization. You see, the Nubian pharaohs left proof of their reign literally carved in stone. Their royal statues that still stand today have distinctly African features, broad noses, full lips, and the proud bearing of nobility. Only in the 1960s did archaeologists begin to look at Nubia with a more open mind. What they discovered was a sophisticated African culture that not only matched Egyptian achievements, but often surpassed them, with its own distinctive traditions of construction, burial customs, and artistic expression that were uniquely Nubian creations. This was the true kingdom of Kush, powerful, wealthy, and deeply spiritual, ruled by kings and queens whose ambitions would forever alter the course of history. And as they watched their northern neighbor Egypt fall into decay, these rulers decided it was time for an intervention. If you're tired of watered-down narratives and want the real raw stories they tried to erase, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because here on Black Stories Untold, we uncover the greatness they don't want you to remember. Around 760 BC, as Egypt continued its spiral of decline, King Paye of Nubia saw an opportunity to expand northward. Leading his forces into Egypt, he swiftly captured Thebes, Egypt's spiritual center, and eventually gained control over much of the once mighty empire. But this wasn't a typical invasion. Unlike other conquerors who came to plunder and destroy, Paye showed remarkable respect for Egyptian traditions. After securing power, he made peace with local rulers and allowed many to maintain their positions, focusing on stability rather than vengeance. This successful campaign launched what historians now call the 25th dynasty, a line of 5 Nubian pharaohs who would rule Egypt for nearly a century, from 747 to 656 BC. Under their leadership, Upper and Lower Egypt were united for the first time in centuries. The fragmented kingdom became whole again, with the Nubian kings controlling territory stretching from deep in Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean. And now, we come to the heart of our story, how the Nubian pharaohs didn't just conquer Egypt, but saved it from cultural extinction. Under Nubian rule, Egypt experienced a true renaissance. The Nubian kings poured vast resources into rebuilding temples that had fallen into disrepair. They revived artistic styles from Egypt's most glorious eras. They restored religious ceremonies that had been forgotten. Across the land, from the Delta to the First Cataract, Egypt was being reborn under African leadership. For nearly 1,000 years, Egyptians had abandoned their most iconic architectural achievement, the pyramid. The last major Egyptian pyramid had been built during the Middle Kingdom, around 1700 BC. But the Nubian kings, seeing themselves as the true heirs to Egypt's greatest pharaohs, brought back this ancient tradition. They built their own pyramids, first at El Kuru in 751 BC for King Pi, and later at Nuri. Today, there are twice as many Nubian pyramids still standing as there are Egyptian ones, a testament to the African architectural genius that European archaeologists tried so hard to deny. The greatest of these Nubian pharaohs was undoubtedly King Taharqa, who was crowned in Memphis in 690 BC. His reign marked the pinnacle of the 25th dynasty's power and cultural achievements. Taharqa embarked on an ambitious building program that transformed the landscape of both Egypt and Nubia. He restored and constructed monuments throughout the Nile Valley, including major works at Jebel Barkal, Kawa, Qasr Ibrim, and especially at Karnak, Egypt's most sacred temple complex. At Karnak, he built the famous sacred lake structures, a magnificent kiosk in the first court, and grand colonnades at the temple entrance. As one historian put it, Thebes was enriched on a monumental scale. The artistic achievements under Taharqa and the other Nubian kings marked what scholars now recognize as a renaissance in pharaonic art. The Nubian rulers commissioned statues, reliefs, and paintings that rank among the finest examples of Egyptian art. But the Nubian pharaohs weren't just collecting Egypt's cultural treasures for themselves. They were genuinely committed to reviving Egypt's spiritual foundations. They saw themselves as divinely appointed guardians of ancient traditions that made Egypt great. Temple inscriptions show they considered themselves chosen by Amun to restore proper worship and cultural practices throughout the land. Perhaps most tellingly, the Nubian kings styled themselves as traditional Egyptian pharaohs in official artwork, while proudly maintaining their Black ancestral identity. Their royal portraits show distinctly African features, yet they wear the double crown of Egypt and carry the traditional symbols of pharaonic power. Archaeological evidence shows that, under Nubian rule, traditional Egyptian crafts flourished again. Workshops produced beautiful jewelry, furniture, pottery, and textiles. The economy stabilized. International trade increased. Egypt, which had been in decline for centuries, was becoming powerful and respected once more. The 25th dynasty represents one of history's great ironies. The colonized became the colonizers, but instead of destroying the culture they conquered, they saved it. And as we're about to see, their influence would reach far beyond Egypt's borders. While Egypt flourished under Nubian rule, a dangerous shadow was spreading across the ancient world from Mesopotamia, where the Neo-Assyrian Empire was building the most powerful military machine of its time. Their military campaigns left a trail of fallen kingdoms in their wake. The northern kingdom of Israel was crushed with its 10 tribes scattered to the winds, becoming the famous Lost Tribes of Israel, and the Syrians were conquered as the seemingly unstoppable Assyrian war machine continued its brutal expansion. By 701 BC, the Assyrian king had turned his imperial gaze toward the small kingdom of Judah and its capital, the last remaining independent Jewish state after the northern kingdom's destruction. King Hezekiah of Jerusalem prepared desperately for the coming onslaught by strengthening fortifications, building walls, and digging water tunnels. But his preparation seemed pointless against an empire that had conquered every major power in the region. The Assyrian army swept through Judah's countryside, systematically destroying 46 towns and villages before surrounding Jerusalem with siege engines and cutting it off from all outside contact. No city had ever withstood an Assyrian siege, and Jerusalem faced the overwhelming force of the world's military superpower with dwindling supplies and faltering allies. In this moment of existential crisis, King Hezekiah reached out to Egypt for help, and Egypt now ruled by the Nubian 25th dynasty, with the powerful Pharaoh Taharka on the throne. Surprisingly, this move is actually recorded in sacred scripture. In 2 Kings 19:9 and Isaiah 37:9, the Bible specifically mentions that Tirhakah, the king of Ethiopia, was coming to fight against the Assyrians. Modern scholars have confirmed that this Tirhakah was none other than Taharka, the greatest of the Black Pharaohs, whose intervention would alter the course of religious history. What happened next remains one of ancient history's most consequential turning points, with several historical sources offering different but complementary explanations. Assyrian records show they were poised to take Jerusalem but suddenly withdrew. Biblical accounts describe a mysterious plague that decimated the Assyrian forces overnight. But many historians suggest Taharka's advancing army forced the Assyrian king to divide his forces, weakening the siege. The historical evidence likely supports a combination of these factors: Taharka's forces approaching from the south, along with disease spreading through the Assyrian camp, contributing to Jerusalem's unexpected salvation. What's crazy is that had Jerusalem fallen, the small kingdom of Judah would likely have suffered the same fate as its northern neighbor, eventually lost to history, as happened with the lost tribes of Israel. Instead, Jerusalem's miraculous preservation gave Judaism another century to strengthen its theological foundations during a critical period when the Book of Deuteronomy was added to the Hebrew Bible. As historian William McNeill observed, if Jerusalem had fallen, Judaism would have ceased to exist, leaving nothing to build on centuries later. And without Judaism as a foundation, both Christianity and Islam would become inconceivable. And without these three faiths, the world as we know it becomes unrecognizable, profoundly, utterly different. The Bible, the Quran, and the concept of monotheism that shapes the lives of billions might never have emerged had the Assyrians succeeded in their campaign against Jerusalem. What do you think would have happened if Jerusalem had fallen? Would Christianity and Islam even exist today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear how this changes your view of history. And who helped prevent this world-changing catastrophe? A Black African king from Nubia, whose intervention at this pivotal moment helped create the world's largest religions we still know today. The historical irony is wild. For centuries, European scholars ignored or diminished the contributions of Black Africans to world history. Yet the very religious traditions that European cultures held sacred might not exist without the intervention of an African pharaoh. This really helps demonstrate how direct African actions have shaped our world in ways that have been deliberately obscured by biased historical narratives. For too long, the story of the Nubian pharaohs has been pushed to the sidelines. Why? Because it challenges a narrative that too many wanted to believe, that Africa has no history, that Black people made no great contributions to civilization, that all progress and enlightenment flowed from Europe to a waiting, primitive world. The truth is far more powerful. When Egyptian civilization faltered, it was Black kings from Nubia who restored its greatness. They didn't destroy what they conquered. They rebuilt it, revitalized it, and honored its traditions while proudly maintaining their own identity. And in a moment that would change the course of human history, a Nubian pharaoh's intervention helped save Jerusalem from destruction, preserving the foundation of faiths that billions practice today. The story of the Black kings reminds us that our ancestors weren't just colonized peoples. When they tell you that Black people have no history, when they tell you that Africa made no contributions to civilization, when they tell you that greatness isn't in your DNA, remember the Black kings who saved ancient Egypt,